Thank you so much for having me, first of all.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. So kind of just gonna dive right in.
Go for it.
Did you always know that you were going to be a filmmaker, or did it just start off as a hobby?
I was a film fan when I was a kid, and I did a lot of drawing and writing, and kind of like comic book or graphic novel kind of styles. And so that's, in a funny way, it's a kind of cinematic storytelling. You're telling stories with pictures. So that was a kind of natural development. I didn't think of myself as ever actually being a filmmaker for a living. When I was in my late teens, let's say, I made some little animated films and some little documentaries, but I didn't think that I'd ever have a job in Hollywood. I came to Orange County here in California. I drove a truck. I worked as a machinist. I worked as a janitor at a high school. You know, if you've ever wondered who the guy was that picked the bubble gum off the bottom of the desk when you put it there, that was me. And then at a certain point, I just thought, I'm not going anywhere with this. Let me try making a film. So I worked with some of my friends, and we made a short film. And then one thing led to another, and within a couple of years, I was actually working professionally in the movie industry in my late 20s.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Is there any specific film that kind of made you go like, oh, like that's something that I would want to do?
Yeah, I can think of it very specifically. It was 2001: A Space Odyssey. That came out in 1968 when I was 14. And at that point, I was a big science fiction fan, and I was seeing things on the screen that I didn't understand how it was possible for them to do. So I wanted to know. So it was also one of the first movies that had a book written about how it was made. So I bought that book, and I went through it from cover to cover 10 times. And I started to realize how some of these techniques were done. And so that put me down a path of thinking about animation and visual effects and model building and all of that stuff. So I kind of did that in a hobby-like way, and to learn for myself long before I started doing it, you know, as a paid job.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Are you a fan? Are you a Star Wars fan?
Yeah, I was, and Star Wars came out obviously 9 years later, and obviously it was influenced in terms of the look of the spacecraft and so on by 2001.
Yeah, definitely.
But its energy was completely different. It was much more dynamic. It wasn't technical and cold. It was fun. It was exciting, and everything kind of just blew up at that point in the visual effects world. It was a big revolution, and I wanted to be in on it. And Star Wars was the film that made me want to go actually do it. I'd been studying all this stuff. Star Wars was the film that made me want to go actually work and do the work. I didn't know if I was going to be a model builder or maybe a cameraman, visual effects guy, something like that. Eventually, because I was a storyteller at heart, I went through visual effects to design, production design on movies, building sets and so on, then to directing. But in a very short space of about 3 years, I homed in on directing.
So have you seen the new one?
Yes, I have.
What do you think?
Well, look, George Lucas is a friend of mine, and he and I were having a good conversation the other day about it. I don't want to say too much about the film.
Yeah,
definitely. I also have a lot of respect for J.J. Abrams, and I want to see where they're taking it next. You know, see what they're doing with it. I have to say that I felt that George's group of 6 films had more innovative visual imagination, and this film was more of a retrenchment to things you had seen before and characters you had seen before, and it took a few baby steps forward with new characters. So for me, the jury's out. I want to see where they go with it.
Yeah, awesome. Okay. When writing a script, is it harder to get started or to keep going?
Well, look, it's easy to have an idea. It's showing up day to day, and you know, you have your morning coffee, and then you sit there and you say, okay, now what am I going to do? You know, and then you just dive into it and you start writing scenes. I think the hardest part is what I call the startup torque. It's that moment when you've got the general idea and you've got to get into a process, and the characters haven't really come alive yet. Once the characters come alive, they kind of, you know, writers like to say they write themselves. You know, of course they don't write themselves, but you start to be able to channel your mind through the lens of different characters. And then it becomes much easier and it flows faster.
That's awesome to think about.
So for me, it's an accelerating curve. I start out writing pages very slowly, and then toward the end, I might be writing 5-10 pages a day.
Oh, yeah.
It's just screaming out.
Yeah.
But all of that is necessary. It's not like you could chop off the first half of the process.
Yeah. So would you say it's kind of like Like you have days that you're like, oh yeah, this and this and this, and then you have days where you're like, oh, I don't know.
Yeah, there's day. Well, I think what you do is I think it's important for any writer to just maintain output.
Oh
just
yeah.
just sit down and write something by the end of the day. Now you may come in the next day and think, man, what the hell was I thinking, and throw it out. In which case, in retrospect, that day was not productive. But you always want to be productive. And then some days you just it just goes nuts on you, and all of a sudden you've got some great scene you never even thought you were going to write. And I find that those are the scenes you always hold on to, because it's that kind of inspiration that just popped out of nowhere.
Cool. When do you know that a script is ready to shoot, and what is your process of getting it there?
I think a script may be ready to shoot but may not be perfect. I think it's at a point, for me a script gets to a point where I want to hear actors say the lines, and then I'll know if the scenes are working the way I think they should or can. And then for me, when I start with a script, I know there are two more drafts that are going to take place. One is the actors, because they're going to put it kind of in their words and their cadence and so on. And sometimes I'll listen to them in rehearsal, and I'll even write down what they say, and I'll fold it back in to the script so it's official. And then the last pass is the editing.
Yes.
And editing is the last draft of the script. You're gonna learn how to truly tell the story in editing.
I think I saw a quote a while ago that said, I think it said, a piece of art is never finished, it's just abandoned. What's your take on that?
I think that it's pried out of your fingers by
Exactly,
reality.
yeah, definitely.
I mean, I think it's fine if you're a playwright or you're a novelist, but nobody, you don't publish a screenplay.
Yeah.
You release a film. So the screenplay is a means to an end, in my mind. It's not some sacred document. It's a working document, and from that, your various departments can go off and start designing props and costumes and set pieces and creatures and all that, and then you're going to go get some actors, and then the actors are going to come in, and then they'll breathe life into the characters. And so for me, it's a process of constant kind of discovery and refinement throughout the whole. Where the film ultimately gets abandoned is when the release date is 2 weeks down the line.
Exactly.
And you've got to make some decision, But by then, I think all of the major decisions have been made, and now you're tweaking, you're just refining sound and trying to finish the visual effects.
Are there any common qualities in cinema today that you dislike? Are there any that you try to avoid doing in your work that you see in other movies?
Well, I think that the pace of editing has constantly sped up over the last 20 or 30 years, and I've consciously worked against that. Like Titanic, for example, has a very, very slow pace of cutting, which allows people to take in the frame, take in the production design, take in the actors' expressions, and so on. It's actually cut at a rate that's about 3 times slower than the average movie today. Even Avatar, I held on shots about 1.5 to 2 times as long as a typical movie today. So I think movies are cut too fast. I think filmmakers look at them during the editing process and they actually memorize their own cut. And I do an experiment with myself when I'm finishing a film, that I'll take fast cut action sequences, because action sequences tend to be cut very fast, and I'll turn the film around backwards so it's a mirror image. I used to do it by actually turning the film in the projector. Now we just do it by applying an effect that flops. It's called a flop when you do a mirror image. And I watch the film not backwards from end to end, but mirror image. And it breaks all the circuitry that I've built up for where to look next. And it's how I know if a cut is working, an action cut is working. And sometimes I'll have to hold on a shot longer, or take a shot out and bridge across, let a part of it stay uncut. Another thing I think films have forgotten is that the world is beautiful. There was a period of time where films got grimmer and grimmer and grayer and grayer, and as much as I love The Matrix, everything was kind of black and white and green, and it worked for that film, but did every film need to look that way? No, I don't think so. And so, in Avatar and in Titanic, these are obviously very successful films. They're also very beautiful. They're not grim. I mean, they have grim moments, but they also have beautiful moments. Beauty for beauty's sake. I think that's missing from films today. And by the way,
is.
when they first started making films in color, they put in scenes just because they looked good. It's a crazy concept. This scene is not advancing the plot. It's not advancing the characters. There's no conflict. Why is it there? Because it looks beautiful. And I think people forget to do that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think we kind of covered this earlier, but which directors do you admire most and influence your work?
I tend to be, look, I certainly have studied
Oh,
the,
yeah.
the masters,
Yeah.
David Lean, Hitchcock, Kubrick, everybody. Directors that continue to that inspire me. Ridley Scott. I mean, I'll go to see
Yeah.
any Ridley Scott movie, even the ones that bomb. To
Yeah.
me, are great because of the fabric of the filmmaking. Just the way he sees, the way he places the camera, and so on. And I'm out there going to school every day. I think any good filmmaker is out there going to school.
Yeah.
I'm also inspired by. These are established filmmakers now, but I remember being very inspired by them when they first kind of broke on the scene, like Zack Snyder and Robert Rodriguez, guys that were just creating their own new cinematic language. So I can be inspired by somebody whose name I don't even know. If they do something that's unique and remarkable and nobody's seen it before. A friend of mine who's a visual effects guy just directed Deadpool, and I went to see Deadpool, and the opening credit sequence was like, damn, nobody ever thought of that. Do fake credit sequence.
Yep.
And how brilliant is it? And it sets the tone for the whole movie, and you're laughing before the film even starts.
Yeah.
Because directed by some tool, some overpaid tool. It's like brilliant.
It is brilliant.
So I think, part of the fun for me as a filmmaker is to get inspired by what other people are doing, and then, without copying or plagiarizing, but being inspired by something and want to say, oh, that gives me some ideas for my own work.
Yeah, it's awesome. Did film inspire your love of exploration, or did exploration inspire your love of film?
I think exploration and filmmaking kind of grew in parallel for me. I mean, as a kid, I loved science.
Yep.
I was very curious. I was a natural explorer, even just taking hikes and collecting bugs and that sort of thing, dissecting frogs on my own time, So I always loved that, and I always loved filmmaking, and I finally got to put them together with the documentary deep ocean films that I started making in the early 2000s, and wound up doing 8 expeditions and doing a lot of exploration. And I was always able to pay for them with the filmmaking. But the interesting thing there was that the film wasn't the reason we were there. We were there to explore.
Oh, definitely.
The film was the way we paid for it. So it was a refreshing kind of prioritization for me. Okay, filming is important. We need to do it and do a good job because it's what paying for the expedition. But the expedition was why we were there.
Yeah, definitely.
And if we hadn't had to make the film, I would have still done the expedition. You see what I mean?
Oh,
and
definitely.
As a filmmaker, that just really messes with everything that's sacred. Because when you're on a film set making a movie, the movie is the most important thing in the world.
Yeah.
To you.
Oh, yeah, definitely. There is a quote that says, "We get noticed because of our successes, but we create them on the back of our failures. We learn best from the experiences where it doesn't work, and yet we still only discuss the success, not the failure. What failures of your own have you been able to learn from, and how do they change you and your process?"
Okay, well, I'll tell you as soon as I have one.
Awesome. There you go.
No, obviously, filmmaking is about a series of small failures.
Oh, yeah.
From which you correct. You try a design, you don't like the design, throw it away.
Yeah.
You try another design, you say, I like that design. An actor reads for you, and it's not their failure. It's just you don't.
It doesn't
like that
click.
person
Yeah.
for it. You try a scene. Scene doesn't work. You rewrite it at lunch. You go back and reshoot it. So to me, it's a corrective process going along.
Yeah.
What is failure in the film business? Is it that an audience didn't show up for your movie? Does that make it a bad movie? I've made films that I really liked and I'm still proud of that didn't make any money. Either as a writer or as a producer,
That's
as
very
a documentary
true.
filmmaker. I've been blessed as a director that all my films have made money. Some a lot more than others, But The Abyss, for example, it didn't break even until home video. So that squeaked through.
Yeah.
And but I'm still really proud of the work by everybody in the film, the actors, the design people, visual effects, everything. So I think failure is how you define it. And
Definitely.
I don't think of anything that I'm satisfied by and still proud of at the end of the day as being a failure, even if it didn't make any money. That's somebody else's metric.
Yeah, definitely. We hear so much about the lack of original stories in the world and that we've all seen it before. How do you stay fresh in the face of an idea like that?
Well, it's interesting because I've done sequels, which obviously that's not original because the characters and so on are carrying over. I've done sequels to other people's, or I've done a sequel to another person's film, which is Aliens. So I was inheriting a character and a world there. but I made it my own. I made it fresh. I reinvented it. You know, I did a sequel to my own film, Terminator. I made Terminator 2, completely reinvented it.
Yeah.
I think, and I've done original stuff. I did an adaptation of a French film, which became True Lies, the Arnold
Oh yeah.
Schwarzenegger
Yep.
film. Titanic was original, but it was based on a historical event, so it's not, you know, I didn't
Yeah,
have a completely
yeah.
blank canvas there. Avatar was a totally blank canvas.
Yeah.
So I've worked at all the different
Yes,
extremes
yeah.
of it. Ultimately, you have to put your own kind of emotional, philosophical, artistic stamp on anything you do, whether it's based on a prior work or whether it's completely raw.
Yeah. Do you think you would still have been interested in filmmaking when films had no sound or color?
Well, they didn't for a while.
Long while.
Oh,
Yeah.
you know, look, I mean, I think of Georges Méliès, who was a fantastic artist and a great pioneer. And, you know, I probably would have been like him. I would have worked within the limitations of the technique when I was first starting, and then I would have very quickly started to figure out, well, how do we put some sound with this? How do
Yeah.
we make it in color?
Yeah.
You know,
How do
'cause
we
I
make
went-
it better? Yeah.
how do we, you know, because I mean, I did that with 3D.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, there was a small vanguard of people who took movies from color widescreen sound to 3D in a way that lasted and is now just the way movies
Yeah,
are presented.
yeah.
And you know, that was, so I know what that feels like.
Yeah, definitely. If there is one or more things you think would make the film industry better, what would it be?
Well, you know, look, I mean, I think filmmakers ultimately get what they want to say up on the screen these days. The visual effects are so good that anything you can imagine, you can create.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of behind-the-scenes process that's just more difficult than it needs to be. And it has to do with the way the studios interact with artists. So I've had the pleasure in the last few years of working with the Cirque du Soleil people, right, based in Montreal. And if the crazier the idea, the more they love you
Oh,
and
yeah,
support
yeah.
you. Like, oh, wait a minute, that's completely nuts. Nobody's ever done that before. That must be good.
It's unique, yeah.
Right? As opposed to in the film industry, if they say that's totally nuts, nobody's ever done that before, it must suck. You know, that's their starting
That's
position.
how sound was, color. They also
Everything.
yeah.
Everything.
They're
So
not open.
They're not open, and you were saying earlier about how films are always based on, you know, something else, a sequel or a remake, or based on a comic book or something like that, and original ideas aren't celebrated. I think that's the biggest flaw in the business.
Yeah, definitely. When filmmaking began, there was only two screens for a long time, the movie screen and the television screen. Now there are also computers, tablets, and phones. Screens are everywhere, including at home, in cars, and in restaurants. As a creator, how does this affect the stories you tell and how you tell them?
It actually doesn't change how I do it, because I don't
That's
make movies.
true.
I always tell everybody I don't make movies for iPhones. You want to watch my movie on an iPhone, go right
Yep.
ahead. I'll be happy to take the money, but it's not what it was made for. It was
Yeah.
made for the big screen, immersive experience. And for me, it's not so much about the size of the screen; it's about the contract between the viewer and the work.
Yeah, definitely.
And when you're watching something on some little thing, you're multitasking. You're more aware of people around you, you're stopping, you're starting, and so on. And I think that there's a linear scale between screen size and focus and concentration.
Oh, definitely.
So a movie will only be as good as the decision you've made beforehand to focus on that movie. So when you go to a movie theater, you're paying hard-earned cash to sit in a seat, keep your mouth shut, and not take any phone calls.
That's very true.
I like that.
Yeah.
You know, so my work doesn't change that much,
Yeah.
because I'm making movies for that kind of immersive experience where we spend a lot of money. We spend, you know, $2 million a minute
Yeah.
to make that the ultimate experience. If you look away for a minute, I just wasted $2 million. You see what I mean?
Yep, it's very true.
Okay, now, having said that, I understand that there's an enormous amount of content that's made for casual viewing. And I think that what we're seeing is that the audience in advance is deciding how they want to see something. You look at 10 movie trailers, right? And you'll say, that one I can watch, you know, on TV or on my iPad, and I can pause it as much as I want, or I can look away, or I can take a text or whatever. And, you know, like a rom-com or
Yeah,
gross-out comedy,
yeah,
or,
yeah,
you know, stoner comedy or whatever it is, you know, I mean, something like that doesn't really, as long as I get a few great jokes and a few good lines for work the next day,
Yeah.
I'm covered, you know. Other films, you want to have that experience where you go somewhere and you feel the emotions. You have a powerful emotional reaction. And I think people make up their minds ahead of time. And that's why some movies they must go to see in a theater.
Yeah.
Some movies, yes or no, I can wait for cable, you know, or I can wait for a download. And others, for sure, you know, I'm just
Yeah.
going to sample it at some point.
That's interesting.
And I think we've learned to make that decision ahead of
definitely. So this is actually a question from a student in my class that was very curious, and he was asking, what was it like working with Stan Winston for practical effects?
Yeah, Stan and I became really, really close friends. He was one of my best friends, and you know, his passing hit me pretty deeply because he and I had kind of come up together, and we had done some real milestone work together. It was great because Stan was a guy who celebrated the artist. In the same way I was talking about Cirque du Soleil, people celebrate the artist, Stan celebrated the artist. He was an artist himself, so he understood the artistic mentality. And he could work with a team of designers and sculptors and so on, and not put them under his thumb and have to be the guy that did the final design or whatever.
Definitely.
He would let them all flourish, and that's what gave him his strength, you know, at his facility. Why don't we let this helicopter
Definitely.
go over? You can cut around them.
Very true.
They're orbiting us. They saw some lights and they're going in 300mm lens. Well, let me just say about Stan. Stan was also a great collaborator. So I was kind of talking about how he dealt with his guys in his team, but how he and I dealt with each other was just mutual respect because we were both.
That's very
we were
important.
both artists. We could both draw. And sometimes he would take a design that I had done and he'd turn it over to his team and they'd make it. Sometimes they would design it and I'd say, yeah, that's fantastic, just do that. Or sometimes I'd say, change this, change that. And there was never, I mean, Stan had a big ego, because I think some of the most creative people do, but he never let it get in the way. And he loved the fun of the collaboration and he loved the fun of making magic on the set, you know. And you know, there's plenty of people that have that, but Stan was kind of a unique character in my life, you know.
Awesome. So what advice would you give to someone who wanted to have a life creating film?
Well, first of all, be prepared for a long, hard slog to get established. You know, nobody's going to tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, I heard you wanted to be a filmmaker. Here, do this, or here's some money. It doesn't work that way. You've got to fight in tooth and claw.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know. I would say, you know, never do anything unethical, but definitely fight hard and think outside the box and try to figure out workarounds. You know, never do anything illegal, obviously. I would say just be tenacious. I would say don't be so interested in trying to get 10 minutes with somebody that's 5 levels above you and try to like tell them all your good ideas. Spend your time networking with people at your level. They're going to be your team. They're going to be your support structure, and figure out ways that you as a group can figure out, okay, well, you're a good DP, I'm a pretty good writer, you can direct, you can move the dolly, you know what I mean? And then just go start making films.
It's all about the underdogs.
Yeah, it's about creating a solid base of like-minded people around you, and then going out and making a film. Because once you've made a film and you put your name on it, I don't care if it's 5 minutes long and it's about your sister picking her nose. It's a film, and your name's on it. Everything after that, you're just negotiating budget.
Exactly. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for this opportunity. I had fun.
Hey, these are great. These are great questions.
Thank you.
Did you write those all yourself, or did the
A
class
few of them.
kinda...
I asked the class, like, if anyone wants me to ask any questions, but
they're good perceptive questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, so well, good.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you again.
It's been a pleasure. Cut.